Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast, where leaders are empowered to equip and disciple men.
Yeah, and welcome to another episode of the podcast that encourages and equips leaders to more effectively disciple the men in their sphere of influence. To do that, each week we talk about the very best ideas and practices in the area of discipleship and ministry to men. My name is Troy Thomas, and I'm your co-host today, along with the founder and executive director of No Regrets Men's Ministries, Steve Sonderman. Hey, Steve.
Hey, it's good to be here again, Troy, and glad we have a chance to continue to talk about some things that are very important for ministry to men.
Hey, Steve, today we are going to be talking about preparing for the fall season. So what does that mean? Well, we know that ministry has seasons, and here we are in summertime, and the pace of things has kind of slowed down, except for you.
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of months, but it's been great.
And a lot of ministry leaders take some well-deserved time away, and we know that you just can't go full speed, pedal to the metal year-round. If you try and do that, it's a recipe for burning out. You've been there, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
We need our downtime. We see this over and over again with leaders. Over time, if they don't invest in recharging, they're not able to bring their full energy to the ministry. And so that's just the way that God designed us. So just as summertime is for recharging, though, fall is a time for launching. Fall is coming up. It's right around the corner. So we want to take some time today on this podcast and talk about preparing for the fall season. So, Steve, let me kick it off with this question. What are some things that leaders need to be thinking about and planning for to prepare for the fall? How can they use this very important summertime to prepare for the fall?
Yeah, Troy, I would say that there are probably three big buckets, three big areas that I would like us to talk about today. And each of these has some sub points that we're going to get into. But one is the one big area is planning, is really making sure that your ministry year is planned out. So you're not just going month to month and saying, oh, what are we going to do next? But that you've planned it out and you've thought through it. So there's a rhyme and a reason and a purpose to what you're doing. The second big bucket is to be recruiting leaders for what you're going to be doing this coming year, and to really look at and think through where are some of the gaps in our ministry. Is there anything new we want to do? And where do we need to recruit? And then third is training. Is that towards the end of the summer is a wonderful time to do some short training with your existing and new leaders to prepare them for what you're going to be doing. You know, one of the things we've talked about in the past is that you never ask a man to do anything you're not willing to train him to do, because one of the greatest fears that men have is the fear of failure. And so we want to make sure that if we recruited them and they have said yes, that we train them properly to set them up for success. So, Troy, to answer your question in a long way, those are the three big buckets: planning, recruiting, and training. And I know now what we could do is we can sort of look at each one of those and unpack them with some other things that might be, I think, are going to be very helpful for our teams and our leaders as they go through the summer.
That's great. Planning, recruiting, and training. Just a really quick question on training.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with the last one first. On training, does that mean that I'm recruiting new leaders, new volunteers in my ministry, and I've got to get them trained for the fall already?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you can't train them to do everything, but rather what we've discovered over the years is you give them what they need to get started. And training really is an ongoing process. It's part of the discipleship process. We're discipling leaders. And so when you view it from that way, it's not like a one and done. And don't think you have to get everything done, everyone trained up completely, but you just give them what they need to get started. And so I think we can definitely talk about that, and because the training is going to look different. But a lot of some will be for small group leaders as you're thinking about launching some, but there might be some training on how to plan an event And that training will be very different. Or maybe you're training up some guys to care for leaders, or to coach some small group leaders. Coaching how to coach is different than how to lead a small group. And so we'll get into that as we go today. Again,
Okay.
not in full, but we can at least get it started.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous as a new leader, whenever somebody throws me in
Right.
without the tools.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
And so we're going to get into it, but having the training, or at least a commitment, would give me confidence that I can do what's asked. So
Yep.
let's go back to planning. What is
Mhm.
planning all about? What does it look like? What do I need to produce, and what am I expected to do as far as a detailed plan? What does it look like?
Yeah. So, this is something that we talk about in DM 201. And so for you guys who are listening and have been through 201, and I think we have over 100 alumni now in churches all over the country.
That's so great.
In lesson 5, we give you work out your plan. And I'll just say this, if someone hasn't been through DM 101, to think about going through it this fall, but also if you contact us, we could send you, it's just a 1-page template for developing a plan. But that plan will have, for example, your purpose statement. Why do we exist as a ministry? That you sort of worked through that, and you talked about that, why we exist. And then we help the churches to think through, okay, what does our spiritual pathway look like for the men of our church? What is that intentional plan we have, the intentional process to disciple the men of our church at every level of their spiritual journey? That's what a spiritual pathway is. That's what a plan is. So let me unpack that very quickly. Not to do a whole, I think we should, I talked about this already, Troy. I think we should just do a whole session on this down the road. We'll talk about developing a spiritual pathway. But basically there's 4 parts. And as a ministry team, you're thinking about, what are we going to do this year to reach men for Jesus? And maybe it's just one event, maybe it's preparing our guys in our small groups to be able to share their testimony and share the gospel. There's lots of different things you can do, but is there anything we're going to do as a ministry to reach men? Second, what are we going to do this coming year to root men in Christ, to take them deeper so that they're walking with Jesus, learning what it is to be obedient to him, to deal with temptation, to understand fellowship, to walk with Jesus on their own? What are we going to do to root men in Christ? Third, what are we going to do to release our men, to help them understand gifts and service, and to get out of the pew and into the game? And then finally, what are we going to do to reproduce men as leaders in life? And what does it mean to be a leader in the home, to be a leader at work, to be a leader in the church, to lead a small group, but to lead really wherever they are, because everyone is a leader somewhere. And so for a leadership team to just think about those 4 R's: reach, root, release, and reproduce, and say, okay, based on how big we are and where we're at in our, as far as how long we've been going, what's realistic? What can we do? You can't do everything, especially if you're just getting started, but to think through, okay, this year, let's do some small groups, because that's a way to get guys to go get rooted in Jesus. And maybe you want to just do 3 events, just to rally the guys and to launch those groups, but you're thinking through that plan. And so then you want to write that out. Okay, what are the events we're going to do? That maybe it's a reaching event, maybe it's a rooting event, maybe it's a releasing event, maybe it's a reproducing event, or it's a training event. What are we going to do? And then small groups. What are the area we're going to do? What are we going to do there? Are we going to do any large gatherings, maybe like a men's breakfast and something on a regular basis, or a Tuesday or Wednesday night gathering of men? And then what does our training look like this year for leaders? So just to think through that, Troy, and then once you have that plan over 9 months, a plan that's not event-based, it's relationship-based, there's a purpose behind it, one thing leads to the other, you have that plan, then you can think through, okay, what do we need to do to carry out that plan?
That's great. Yeah.
So Go
Steve,
ahead.
I'm thinking about those listeners out there. Maybe they're a leader in administrative men where they're just brand new, or they've
Yeah.
just taken over, or the senior pastor has asked them to step into this situation.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you is go to the DM 101 lesson 5 materials. If you don't have that, if you haven't been through that, reach out to us. We'll get that to you.
Yeah.
We'll coach you on it. We'll help you with those steps. The reaching, rooting, releasing, and reproducing. Why you exist, the spiritual pathway for your men.
Yeah.
You talked about
just real quick.
Yep.
It's actually DM 201.
I'm sorry.
Yep, that's all right. Yeah, lesson 5 is right. We'll send you a template, and that's why we're here, guys. We're here to coach you on this, to help you on this. And we have a number of coaches. You want us just to sit down and help you either on the phone or a Zoom or live to help put together that plan over the next few months. We are here to help do that. So just reach out to us and contact us, and we would love to help you with that.
That's great. Now, some of these guys might be all alone.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about ministry teams, and their ministry team is me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
What do they do then?
Yeah, what we recommend is then maybe one of the biggest things you do this summer is you recruit 1 or 2 guys to go with you to sort of build that leadership team. We always say that's where you start. It's just so much better. Together is better than alone because of vacations and illness and getting transferred or, whatever. But you can just share the responsibilities, share the weight of ministry when you do it together. So if nothing else this summer, you would want to just be thinking about, are there 1 or 2 other guys that have the same interest and passion in ministry to mine that I do? And so that would be, just the recruiting of those guys would be really key, I think, for you.
So where do they find these guys?
Yeah.
Steve?
So I think what you're going to do is you're going to be, as you think about, okay, are there some guys maybe in my men's small group, or are there guys just at church that I know, that I see, that I talked to before and after? I would talk to the senior pastor. Maybe there's been some other guys go on to him and said, hey, if we ever do anything in the area of men's, let me know. I'd like to help out. If you've had any men's gatherings or events or activities in the past, there may be some guys that have helped organize that, or you've met there. And if none of that holds true, and there's just, you know of no one, right, that's in your sphere, your circle, or whatever, then you can still start, but you're going to start slow. And maybe all you do this year is just say, I'm going to start a men's small group. And you're going to just start to get to know some other guys, and you're gonna sort of build your leadership team that way, and just say, listen, this fall, starting in September, I'm going to start a small group of 3 to 5 guys. We're going to meet on Tuesday morning. We're going to go through this, and would you like to join me? And that's ministry to men.
Right.
That's it. And so don't worry about events and big activities and program. Just start with a few guys, and sort of go from there.
One of the things I've noticed, and it just kind of comes to mind, is when you're in that situation, and I've been there, when I've been given the big task of leading a ministry and I'm all alone, is to listen for the complaints.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to hear the complaints, you start to hear men complaining about what should be done. That's an excellent opportunity to invite them into the ministry.
Yeah.
Take that opportunity, be prepared to invite them into joining you in the planning, at least, or building of a community of men who are interested in ministry to other men.
Something a guy could do right away. And again, I'm not trying to push our stuff, but the book that I wrote years ago called How to Build a Life-Changing Men's Ministry really lays out for a guy just the basics and just how to get started. Just for the guy that's done nothing, that would be a great place to start. Again, like I said, I would talk to your pastor and say, hey, I would really like to do something, and just to get his input on what his dreams are, what his visions are, the type of thing he would like to see happen, just to make sure that, he's on board and you're not just, sort of being a maverick and just doing your own deal. But that would be the other thing I would really, that's vital in this process.
So we talked about planning, we talked about recruiting, taking some time this summer to recruit leaders to your team. And we talked a little bit about training. Is there more that we can discuss in this podcast about training that would give these guys some tips or clues to giving those new leaders confidence as they launch into ministry to men?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're gonna train based on role. And what I mean by that is so often we just train to train. But if, let's say you want to launch 3 or 4 new small groups this year for the men of your church, and you've had them in a small group, and these guys have sort of bubbled to the top, and you see some of the qualities needed for a small group leader, then what you're going to want to do is sort of do a little maybe turbo group this summer, where you're going to walk them through some of the basics.
Hey, man, you don't want to miss a beat of what our guests have to say. Make sure you're following us wherever you get your podcast, and follow us on social media at No Regrets Men. Either way, we appreciate your time and hope you have been encouraged in your ministry to men. Our goal, like yours, is to change the world one man at a time.
So you're going to train towards competencies. And there are some basic competencies that a new small group leader needs. And you can't train them in everything. You'll train them in what they need just to get started. So, for example, a small group leader, for example, for specifically, they need to be able to facilitate discussion. And so you're going to want to watch a video or read an article or listen to a podcast specifically on how do you facilitate a good discussion. A second competency that's needed is you want to have a multiplication mindset, and you want to be able to train an apprentice leader for the future. And so you're going to talk about what do you look for in future leaders, and how do you train them in the context of the small group. A third thing a person has to do is care for the men in their group. What does care look like? And so you're just going to talk about some simple things based on that. A fourth competency is the first meeting. What do you do that first time?
Yeah.
And how do you build community? And so that's another one. And so you have some of these basic competencies that a leader needs to get started this fall that you could cover in, let's say, in the month of August, meeting for 4 or 5 weeks, giving them responsibilities, talking about things. One of the books that we use in all of our training is the book Brothers by Jeff Gorsuch. And that would be a great book to read together. It takes you through the 4 stages of a men's small group. It's wonderful training. The other great book is the Disciple Maker's Handbook. And we recommend that as well. And those 2 books together are a great 1-2 punch for new leaders. And maybe you just start with one of them. Maybe you start with Brothers and go through that. And then down the road, you go do ongoing coaching once a month, once a quarter with the leaders. And you just sort of maybe read through that second book together. And that would be a great process. And now you have your whole year laid out of training them. Does that make sense?
That's so helpful. Yeah. And so, Steve, we're thinking about summertime and recharging, but we have our eyes on the horizon. We have our eyes on the fall. As we're looking at it, we're thinking about planning our ministry. We're thinking about recruiting leaders, adding to our team, and we're thinking about getting them trained up.
Yeah.
What else do we need to look at in terms of making use of this summertime to prepare for the fall? What else is out there?
Yeah. Well, I think as you come out of your planning process, then one of the things you're going to want to do is say, are there any new ministries we're going to be doing this year? And maybe it's not even starting to the winter. Who knows when it's starting? But is there a new team that we need to develop? So, for example, maybe you're going to put on the conference this year. You're going to be a host site for the first time, and you've never done it before. You've attended another host site. You've attended it here in Brookfield, but you've never been a host site, and that's not till February 3rd. But you want to start now to think about that. And so is there when you're starting a new ministry, you want to first of all have a point man, a person that you're going to say that they're going to be the point man, they're going to be in charge of this. And then they need to get some guys on their team. And so you might need to help recruit some guys to help put on the conference, a guy in charge of registration, the facilities, the program, publicity, things like that. And then does that team have a purpose? Why do we exist? Every team needs a purpose, why we exist. And then do we have a plan to carry this event out? And so right now, this summer would be a good time to think about anything new you're doing. And then do we have a point man? Does he have a team? Do they have a purpose, and do they have a plan? And so whether you're planning maybe to do a retreat for the first time, or to launch some new small groups for the first time, or whatever it is, but to be thinking about what's new this year, and do we need to find a point person and a team to do that? Would be something else that would sort of come out of that plan.
So what I'm hearing about a lot of different ideas to generate during the summertime.
Yeah.
And I want to make it clear for the listeners that so summertime is a time for recharging.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a time so much to do the work as to be thinking and planning on the work, right?
Exactly.
And so it's a lot of mental energy, but perhaps not as much physical energy,
right?
If that makes sense. We still want to go fishing. We still want to take vacations.
Yep.
We still want to enjoy the sunshine that we don't get so much in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah.
We want to go to the cabin, right?
Exactly.
So we can invest in these relationships and these networks and these ideas, fleshing out ideas in the time that we're physically recharging.
Yep. Totally. And you can, you can also get some of the logistics done ahead of time. So when you get into the throes of the ministry year, that those rooms are reserved, and that you have the facility for the No Regrets conference, and things like that.
Yeah. It's amazing how much a little bit of work in the summertime can pay dividends throughout the fall and winter seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned curriculum. Are there things, I as a ministry leader, always loved the summertime because I could kind of have my reading list. I could have my exploration list, my discovery. And as I looked at curriculum, I would get charged up. I would personally get invested in whatever it was we were going to do.
Yeah.
But are there things that these leaders should be thinking about when they look at and review curriculum, books, materials?
I think that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up, Troy, because I neglected that. But as you're thinking specifically about your small groups, probably maybe your large group gatherings too, but for your small groups, it's one of the biggest questions that leaders ask. What should we do next, and what should we use? And I think as a leader, and as you get your small group leaders together, I think there's some basic things you can be thinking about. Number one, is it relevant to men? Is this a topic? Is this a series? Is this a book? If you're going to do a right now video series, is it something that's going to resonate with guys, that's relevant to guys? Because, we know that one of the biggest reasons guys don't go to church is they say it's irrelevant. And so often as a church, we're answering questions that they're not asking. And so is it relevant? Second, is it biblical? And is it biblically based? Does the material, rooted in the scriptures and going to point guys to Jesus? Third, is it transformational? So often the studies that we do are just for information, and we're just trying to get guys' heads bigger and filled with more knowledge. But as you look at it, do you sense that the real goal of the author, the speaker, the material is to bring about change in the men's lives? Do they after laying the foundation biblically, do they get to application? Is there a way for that group to make sure that they get to application and are holding each other accountable for application?
That's so important.
So yeah, I think those are just, there's probably a lot of other things out there that we could say about that, but I think those are a couple things that come to my mind right away. Is it relevant to men? Is it biblical? Is it Is it transformational? I think another one is it doable?
Oh,
You know, so often, guys are at all different places in their journey. And so for some of the groups, if you're starting a introductory Bible study where this is the first thing they've ever been in, never done a small group before, you don't want to have 2 hours of homework. You don't want to have an hour of homework. It might be 6 weeks, just come and show up. And they watch a short little video or they read something and then you discuss it. Versus the guy that's been a follower of Jesus for 5-10 years. And now they can do a little scripture study on their own. They can memorize a scripture. Maybe they watch something on their own or read something on their own. That's different. And so you want to, as you're choosing curriculum, is it doable? Is it the right curriculum for the stage of maturity?
As you say that, one of the things that I keep going back to is the summertime and preparing for the fall is a lot about listening. And so you've got to be listening to where your men are at. Are they readers? Are they intellectual? Are they academics? Or are they guys who haven't picked up a book since high school?
Yeah.
Right? We've got to be listening to those clues to understand what's relevant to them, what's going to be transformational, what's going to be doable.
Yeah.
And then to be able to build in where is God's word in that, and to connect curriculum that is biblical to them, I think is so key.
That's a really good point, Troy.
Yeah, it's got to be doable. It's got to be something where they're at and not just where you're at.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, and that's part of the listening. Do I know the issues that my guys are facing?
Yeah. What about just off the top of my head here, communication? As we think about the fall, steps in communication, what are some basics that we probably shouldn't miss?
Yeah. I think this is really good, Troy, that we talk on this because one of the points I made over and over, and I still do, is you don't want your ministry to men to be the best kept secret in the church. And if you're going to spend time in the summer planning and recruiting and training and ready to launch something in the fall, you don't want guys to come up to you and say, well, I never knew about it. I didn't hear about it. I didn't know anything about it. And so this is where it kind of gets fun, really, as a leadership team, whether it's just, if there's 5, 6, 8, 10 of you, or if it's just 1 or 2 of you, just to think through, do a whiteboarding, a brainstorming on what are some things we can do in our context with where our guys are at that will help them know what's coming up in the fall. And so again, it all depends. If you have a church that's a bunch of older guys, generally, guys in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, okay, they're not going to be on social media probably as much, or Facebook or things like that. And so you might have to print things out and have a flyer and maybe even mail something out to them,
Mail, what's that?
I know, right? But if you have a bunch of younger guys, 20s, 30s, 40s, you're probably not going to print anything. It's going to be emails, it's going to be texts, and you're going to do group texts, and various things like that. And so you have to tailor your publicity and marketing based on the men, again, that you're working with. Again, it's knowing your men and what type of marketing is going to reach them. And if you don't have anyone in your group that really understands publicity and marketing and communicating, then you might want to just talk around to the guys in church and find out, is there a guy that we could just bring into one of our meetings that could help us with this? And say, hey, listen, Bill, we don't know what to do here. What are your ideas? And to get some help on that, because there are guys that really understand it and could probably really be helpful to you.
Again, oftentimes it's the ones who say, I never heard about this, or they're complaining about not hearing about this, that can help with the communication.
Right.
Those are the guys to tap sometimes to say, hey, how'd you like to put together a flyer or an email, or
the website,
get the word out,
Facebook. And I think too, the other person you're going to want to talk to is if your church has a communications person.
Yes.
And I mean, that's a starting point, is talking to him or her and saying, listen, here's the things we're doing this coming year in our ministry to men. How could you help us? And what do you think we should do? You know the church, you know the people that are going to this church, you've done the studies, and what do you recommend? And to get their input and their help on all this, obviously.
Well, Steve, there is so much to think about, to talk about, so many ideas when we prepare for the fall season. There's so many things that we can be thinking about. We don't want you to lose track of the fact that fall is coming. It's around the corner. We hope that as leaders, you're recharging this summer, but we also want you to prepare for the fall. We could go on this topic, I know, for a long time, but we're up against our time. Leaders, we hope this episode has been helpful to you as you go and make disciples, the men in your sphere of influence. Thank you so much for dialing in. And don't forget something very important. If you find this helpful, if this podcast is something that you look forward to and you want to follow our show, share our show, leave a comment, that'd be great. And check out our episode website. And for Steve Sonderman, I'm Troy Thomas. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for joining the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. For more information and to access past recordings, please visit www.menwithnoregrets.org/podcast.